Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we got another news and rumor video to discuss. In today's video, we're looking at some signings, some interesting pieces of news from our past couple of days, and some trade rumors involving the Oilers, Blue Jackets, Rangers, and a couple of other teams. We'll get to all the updates from our past couple of days coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 500 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for June 27th, June 28th, and July 1st live streams talking about the draft, free agency, and everything else in between. So don't forget to stay tuned for that. But in today's video, we got another news and rumor video to discuss. As usual, we're going to start off the video by looking at some signings from our past couple of days. So we're going to start off in the Pittsburgh Penguins organization, as the Penguins have signed AHL player Joona Koppanen, who is a center/left winger, 27 years old, to a one-year contract extension with the AAV of league minimum, so $775,000. So that's not a bad deal in my opinion for Koppanen. He had a goal and 1 point in 11 games at the NHL level and had 8 goals and 23 points in 56 games at the AHL level, so he was mostly an AHL player. Is a call-up option, seems to be working towards being an NHL level bottom six forward, so 1 year at league minimum I don't think is anything bad for Koppanen, and if he doesn't work out at the NHL level, they can bury him in the minors, so very interesting note there. But Koppanen has signed a 1 year extension in Pittsburgh. Next, going over to the Dallas Stars, they sent 24-year-old goaltender who's been playing over in the AHL, Benjamin Cross, to a 1 year contract extension with the AAV of league minimum, so once again $775,000. Cross has no games of NHL action this past year, playing 3 AHL games, putting up a 3.01 GAA and 89 save percentage, and also had 910 save percentage and 2.88 GAA in 40 games at the ECHL level, so it's more of like a 4th or 5th string goaltender, so just some added goalie depth for Dallas. Maybe eventually Cross could work out to be like a solid 3rd stringer, but for a time being, that's just a little bit of depth there for Dallas at the goaltending position, so very interesting note there. But Cross has signed a new deal with the Dallas Stars. Then we saw the Anaheim Ducks, one of their depth players, and that's Nikita Nesterenko. Nesterenko, who was one of the picks at one of the last couple of years trade deadline, I think from Minnesota or Dallas or someone, is a 23-year-old center/left winger. He gets a 2 year contract extension with an AAV of $788,000, so a little bit above league minimum. Nesterenko this past year played 20 games at the NHL level, putting up 4 goals and 6 points after having 13 goals and 34 points in 48 AHL games. So Nesterenko looks like a pretty good prospect. I think eventually could be a very solid 3rd line player there for the Anaheim Ducks. Probably not going to be next year, but I think in a couple of years time Nesterenko could challenge like a bottom 6 role in Anaheim, so very interesting note there. But Nesterenko was signed a 2 year extension in Anaheim. And the last signing here is Matt Rempe in the New York Rangers organization, the center/right winger, the 6'9" behemoth who played this past year with the Rangers, putting up 3 goals and 8 points in 42 NHL games. Wound up having a 2 year contract extension by the Rangers with the AAV of $975,000. Rempe hasn't overly been a really good productive player over the past couple of seasons at the NHL level, but has been a guy who is not afraid to lay the body and get into fights. So very interesting note there. He had 3 goals and 5 points in 18 AHL games this past year. So very interesting note there. He's like a bottom 6 forward, 4th line guy who's not afraid to lay a body. So it's a very interesting pickup there for the Rangers. 2 years, $975,000 for what is probably going to be a in and out of the lineup 4th line forward is not overly bad in my opinion for the Rangers. So very interesting note there. But those were the 4 signings from the past couple of days. That the Rangers signed Rempe, the Ducks signed Nesterenko, the Stars signed Kraus, and the Penguins signed Koppanen. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to a couple of updates. So we only got 4 updates here to talk about. So first, when it comes to the players signing overseas, Chris Driedger, who's in the Winnipeg Jets organization, and Stezka, who is in the Seattle Kraken organization, have both signed overseas. Driedger signed a 1 year deal over in the KHL, so Driedger was probably going to challenge for a backup role, most likely be a 3rd stringer at the NHL level if he was to sign with a team. So instead of doing that, he signed in the KHL, so hopefully he has a good season over there. Maybe he can come back, maybe he can challenge like a backup role, but given all of his options, Driedger thinks that the best thing for him at this point in time is to go over to the KHL, so very interesting note there. Well, when it comes to Stezka, he was the 3rd stringer this past year for the Seattle Kraken, behind Pickard and Grubauer. NYR. So he was a guy who was the third stringer, pretty solid player there for the Seattle Kraken. He has wound up going over to Czechia. So he got a couple of games at the NHL level, not really a whole bunch. So a very interesting note there. Stezka wasn't probably going to get any NHL time if he was to sign an NHL contract. So he goes overseas and he's going to spend the next couple of years over in Czechia. So very interesting note there. But Driedger, who was in Winnipeg this past year, signs over in the KHL. And Stezka, who was with Seattle, signs over in Czechia. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to a retirement. Nick Bonino, who was a longtime player, played in San Jose, Vancouver, Pittsburgh, Nashville, amongst a couple of other teams, has officially retired from his NHL career. So very interesting note there. He was playing over the past couple of years overseas. He was supposed to apparently sign an extension overseas, but he didn't, and he winds up calling it a career. So very interesting note there. Bonino had one heck of a career. He was on the Pittsburgh Penguins teams when he won back-to-back cups in 2016 and 2017. He was a really big piece of those cup wins for the Pittsburgh Penguins. So very interesting note there. He wound up finishing his career with 159 goals, 199 assists, 358 points in 868 games. So very interesting note there. But after a long career as a solo bomb 6 forward, second, third line center, Bonino has wound up calling it a career. And on top of that, he is joining Dan Muse's staff in Pittsburgh as an assistant head coach. So very interesting note there. So after a couple of years overseas, he's heading back to the NHL, but not as a player, so he's now retired. But he is heading to the NHL as an assistant head coach in the Pittsburgh Penguins coaching staff. So very interesting note there. But Bonino has retired and moved to the Pittsburgh Penguins front office. Next, going over to Seattle Kraken, they made a few coaching hirings when it comes to their assistants. They, like we talked about in our last video, have indeed hired Schneekloth, who was the AHL coach in the Colorado Avalanche organization, and Taylor, who was an assistant in the New Jersey Devils organization, both two assistant coaches in Seattle. So very interesting note there. Taylor was assistant coach over the past couple of years over in New Jersey, spent this past year as part of Sheldon Keefe's staff, but the Kraken have brought him in to be a part of Lambert's staff. While Schneekloth hasn't got any NHL head coaching experience or coaching experience in general, and he was the AHL head coach, so he's going to get an opportunity to be the NHL coach for the first time in his career. So very interesting note there. But Schneekloth and Taylor have been named assistants in Seattle, while the Seattle Kraken have also signed Zulanilo to be the team's new goalie coach. So he's been in the system over the past couple of years as a depth coach, like in a lower role. So they have promoted him to be the goalie coach. That's a very interesting hire there for the Seattle Kraken. So very interesting note there. But the Kraken have signed two players, Schneekloth and Taylor, as assistants, and promoted Zulanilo as a goalie coach. So very interesting note there. And lastly, going over to some buyout rumors. The buyout window is almost upon us. The buyout window happens 48 hours after the Stanley Cup final ends. As of the recording of this video, that will be like 10 or 11 hours from now. And on top of that, the window will be open until June 30th. So it's going to be open for about a week and a half. So with that in mind, there's about to be a whole bunch of players being placed on the buyout window. We usually see at least 5 to 6 players, if not maybe a couple more, be placed on the buyout window to be bought out. According to a couple of recent reports I've seen, TJ Brodie is a very likely chance to be bought out within the first day or two of the window opening. So very interesting note there. Brodie, I think, is making $3.5 million for one more season. So I think when I was looking at the buyout doesn't really cost the Hawks a whole bunch. I think it's going to leave them with about $500,000 on their cap this year, and about, I think, $300,000 on their cap next year. So it's like not a really bad contract to buy out for the Blackhawks. So keep your eye on Brodie. If there's a lot of buyouts that happen over the next day or two, I'll probably make a separate video talking about it. But definitely keep your eye on TJ Brodie as a potential buyout candidate for the Blackhawks. And there's probably going to be a couple of other guys. The name that comes to mind, in my opinion, will be Philip Grubauer in Seattle. I wonder about Andersson in New York, and there's probably a handful of other guys who would make a ton of sense that I'm probably just not thinking about right now. So very interesting note there. But those are the news updates from the past couple of days. As keep your eye on TJ Brodie. He could be a buyout candidate. The Kraken have hired some assistants and a goalie coach. Bonino has retired and joined the Pittsburgh Penguins as an assistant. And then Driedger and Stezka has signed overseas. So very interesting note there. And lastly, here going over to a couple of trade rumors. So we've got a lot of things to talk about. 7 rumors to talk about here today in total. So first, when it comes to the Montreal Canadiens, Darren Dreger says that they are open for business and would like to add a second or third line center. So that doesn't come as too much of a surprise. They signed Jake Evans to a longer term deal who can play third or fourth line center minutes, but they're losing Christian Dvorak, they're losing Yoel Armia, who are both about to become UFAs. Dvorak was a solid second or third line center, so on top of him being moved, they really had no true second line center behind Nick Suzuki this year, and Kirby Dach, he was injured a whole bunch again this year. So with that in mind, it seems that the Habs are going to be in the market for a center. We've heard about them being linked to a guy like Marco Rossi. We've heard them potentially be looking around. Centers who could be available would be a guy like Matthew Barzal. I wonder if the Jackets could be making one of their centers available. Like, there's probably a couple of teams out there who could be looking to move a center who would probably have some interest by the Montreal Canadiens. So very just note there, the Canadiens have a plethora of draft picks. They have some really good prospects that they probably all can't get into their system. So there's a very likely chance that we could see the Montreal Canadiens make some very massive moves. And it seems like their top priority right now, as we talked about in our offseason preview video, is going to be adding a second or third line center. So very interesting note there, but keep your eye on the Habs to try and go after a second or third line center, which I think makes a whole bunch of sense. As second line center behind Nick Suzuki, that team vastly improves. So very interesting note there, but keep your eye on the Habs. Going over to the New York Rangers and the Buffalo Sabres, according to Elliot Friedman, he's sort of debunking a couple of these rumors that we've been hearing about. He says that the Rangers have not gone to Mika Zibanejad about waiving a no movement clause. He says that the Rangers also haven't gone to Mika Zibanejad looking to try and ask for a trade list for him. He says that the Rangers are looking to try and basically try and work with Zibanejad to try and keep him, sort of similar to what the Elias Pettersson situation is. We've heard about Pettersson over the past couple of weeks and months as potentially being moved, but now it seems like we're getting closer and closer to July 1st, and it's sort of seeming like the Canucks really want to work with Pettersson to sort of try and make him into a better player than he was this past year, rather than just trade him. Friedman's giving off the same sort of vibes when he's talking about Zibanejad, saying that they really want to see if he can mesh well with a guy like JT Miller. And even though Kreider was moved, Friedman's sort of wording seems like it's sounding like Zibanejad's probably going to stay, more likely than get traded. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. No guarantees by any means that Zibanejad does wind up staying. I, for one, could wind up seeing a scenario happen, but if it's not the right deal, why would you trade a top two center on your team? So in my opinion, unless there's a really good deal that blows the Rangers away, I don't think the Rangers are going to go over and ask Zibanejad to waive his no movement clause, which is what Elliot Friedman is reporting. So very interesting note there. When it comes to him talking about Alex Tuch, he says that he has not got any indication that Alex Tuch is either requested a trade or will not re-sign with the Buffalo Sabres should the Sabres try to offer him an extension. So it seems like Tuch's pretty happy with the situation in Buffalo. It doesn't sound like he's probably going to wind up getting moved. Like, I wouldn't blame him. He's from Buffalo. He's been a very, very fantastic piece of that team ever since he was acquired in the Jack Eichel trade. Like, he's been a really good piece. I don't think the Sabres would want to move him unless he's not willing to resign on an extension. And if he's okay with signing an extension in Buffalo, then I feel like the Sabres will probably try and keep him. So I don't think the Sabres really want to go through another rebuild. Maybe a small retool to try and just revamp this team up in a different sort of setting. But I don't see Alex Tuch getting moved if he wants to stay. And it's according to Elliot Friedman, it sounds like Tuch's indicating that he probably will like to stay in Buffalo. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. But keep your eye on Alex Tuch because he's a potential option here to get moved by Buffalo. We're going to go over to Keandre Miller. Frank Seravalli was talking about this recently, and he mentioned that there are at least 12 to 15 teams interested in Keandre Miller. Now, that's a long list of teams, so there would have to be a couple of teams in there who would have some of the money and be willing to pay Miller probably like $5 to $6 million on an AAV, which is what I would expect Miller to get. I don't think he's in the stratosphere of like a $7 to $8 million defenseman, but I could see him get maybe just a little bit over $6 million on the right team. So there would be a ton of teams. Like, we've heard LA recently. I personally wonder about San Jose, about Calgary with the depth that they need in the defense. I wonder about Anaheim. I wonder about maybe Utah trying to add some more defensive help. Maybe Pittsburgh, maybe Philadelphia. Like, there are a ton of teams at this point in time who could use a top four left shot defenseman who's on the younger side of things and could be cost control for the next couple of seasons. So it'll be very interesting out there. Like, there is a lot of reports out there saying that Keandre Miller is on the trade block, and I think it's very likely at this point, probably more likely than him staying, that Miller gets dealt. So at this point, I don't think it's going to be too surprising when we hear about Keandre Miller trade. It's going to be interesting to see what the Rangers could get for him and which sort of team he goes, because if there's 12 to 15 teams interested, the Rangers could start a bidding war, which they could get quite a good return for him. So we're going to have to wait and see on that, but keep your eye on Keandre Miller, as he could be a guy who winds up being had, according to Frank Seravalli, and there are 12 to 15 teams interested, which to me comes as no surprise with how good of a defenseman Miller is, so very interesting note there. Next, going over to the Calgary Flames, according to Pagnota, he says that the Flames will be interested and listening on Rasmus Andersson for a potential trade if they can't get some progress worked on an extension towards the end of this month. So according to Frank Seravalli, he says that the Flames and Rasmus Andersson recently exchanged numbers on what an extension could look like. He didn't know what the sort of conversations went like, but he did say that he thinks that those two sides have given their opinion on what an extension could look like. And according to Pagnota, if things don't start progressing well towards the extension towards the end of June and early July, apparently the Flames could be listening in on Rasmus Andersson. They can't lose another pending UFA like they did Gaudreau and Tkachuk. Tkachuk wasn't losing for nothing, but they can't lose another pending UFA as a free agent on July 1st next offseason. Like, that just cannot happen. So if Andersson and the Flames can't really work together on an extension, I could definitely see the Flames try and trade him, because I definitely think they can't lose him in free agency. So if it doesn't sound like there's some extensions working in place for the Calgary Flames, expect Andersson to potentially be on the trade market and potentially wind up getting dealt at some point this offseason. Next, going over to Darren Dreger, he was mentioning the Columbus Blue Jackets, and he says that the Jackets are going to be big players on the trade front this offseason, and that comes as no surprise to me either. The Jackets have 2 first-round picks, the 14th and 20th overall pick, 20th thanks to the Minnesota Wild in the Juracek deal. They also have a couple of really solid prospects, some defensive guys like Matejchuk, Bjork Ekholm, some offensive guys, and they have a plethora of young, already established NHL-level players. They have Sillinger, they have Fantilli, Marchenko. Like, I'm not going to say they're going to trade all these guys. Chinakov, Voronkov. Like, they have a lot of guys. I'm not going to say it's a guarantee by any means that the Jackets trade any of these guys, but the Jackets have a whole bunch of trade chips, and I think that the Jackets, given how close they got this year, are probably 1 to 2 big moves, probably a goaltender, maybe adding some more depth and firepower up front and on the blue line, from being a top 3 contender in the Metro Division, potentially even a cup contender. So I think they will have to make some moves, but according to Darren Dreger, he says that they're going to be big players in the trade market, and given the amount of draft capital they have, the solid prospects they have, the amazing amount of young NHL players they have, I for one would not be one bit surprised that Jackets made some pretty big moves on the trade market this year. So we're going to have to wait and see on that, but keep your eye on the Jackets over the next couple of weeks as a potential big name when it comes to the trade market. And lastly, going over to the Edmonton Oilers, according to Elliot Friedman and Mark Spector, the Edmonton Oilers could go after a goaltender move this summer. It's very interesting to note there. Spector says that the Oilers are very likely to go after some sort of a goaltender to work with Stuart Skinner, and it'll probably come at the expense of Calvin Pickard. Well, Elliot Friedman mentioned that he wonders if the Edmonton Oilers try and go for someone who could work with Skinner in the nets for the Edmonton Oilers, or he wonders if they try and rework the goaltending entirely. Now, Skinner, I think, either has 2 years left or is entering the final year of his deal. He's got just over a $3 million cap hit. Skinner's not a bad goaltender. Do not get me wrong. I think he's a pretty dang good goaltender. I'm just not sure if he's the best as a starter. I think he can be a tandem goaltender. I think he can be like a 1A, 1B. He's shown that in the past. I just do not believe that Skinner, at this current point in time, as they started at the NHL level. So if they're bringing in a tandem who can be a 1A and Skinner can be a 1B, I think that would be a smart move there for the Oilers. Or if they're trading Skinner for a goaltender back, I think that could also be a smart move there for the Oilers. Pickard's also not a bad backup either, but I think he's more of a guy who should be just a backup, not anything else. Like, he shouldn't be a tandem goaltender like he has in this past couple of years. He should be a backup. So I think the Oilers have some pretty good goaltenders in Skinner and Pickard. Do not get me wrong. I just think they're out of place. I think Skinner should be a tandem goaltender, probably a 1B, and Pickard should be a clear-cut backup instead of Pickard being a 1B and Skinner being like a 1A/starter. So it seems like the Oilers are out the ropes after this past Stanley Cup when they lost to the Florida Panthers. The goaltending wasn't the problem, but it didn't help them either. So I would expect the Oilers to be in on Gibson, Demko, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, probably maybe a guy like Jake Allen or Anton Forsberg in free agency. Like, I'm not exactly sure who they're going to go after, but I definitely think adding a goaltender has got to be a priority here for the Edmonton Oilers. And according to Friedman and Spector, they both think that the Oilers could go goalie hunting this offseason. According to Elliot Friedman also, he says that the Oilers were checking in on what sort of a market they have for Evander Kane at the trade deadline. And he says that there is a possibility that they could try and move Kane, and there could actually be a market for him. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of Kane. I don't think he brings too much, especially in big games. He's a solid physical type forward. He can lay the body. He can also put up points and goals on occasions, but he's not the biggest point contributors. And a $5 million cap hit, I think that's way too egregious. I think for most teams, Kane would be like a third, fourth line guy and can push you up the occasional point. So I'm not sure if the Oilers are going to be able to get out of the entire contract. They may have to attach a sweetener or try and retain some money. But according to Elliot Friedman, there could be a market out there for Evander Kane. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. With the Oilers' recent signing of Trent Frederick, there's definitely going to have to be a lot of movement this offseason if they're going to try and keep Evan Bouchard and potentially even try and get better. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. But that's what we're talking for today. I left your guys' thoughts. What moves do you think Edmonton could do this offseason? Could they move a goaltender? Do they move Kane? Let your guys' thoughts on that. Do the Jackets try and make some big moves this offseason? What are the 12 to 15 teams who could have some interest in Miller? Does Tuch wind up staying in Buffalo and Zibanejad wind up staying in New York? Do the Habs try and trade for a second or third line center? And could the Flames try and listen on Andersson if they can't get an extension in place? Definitely your thoughts on all of that. Plus the news updates and the signing updates from our past couple days. Definitely your thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That is all I'm going to talk for today. Remember to like this video, and if you're listening, subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 500 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for June 27th, 28th, and July 1st live streams talking about the draft, for agency, other things. I also have a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So check that out. I'll link that down in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for next video, and I'll see you guys soon.